Now, don't get me wrong, nothing is without merit, and there are definitely things that temporarily distracted me from the awful plot, and credit should be given to those who deserve it. So let's talk about the good stuff, like the impressive and awe-inspiring spectacle. It most certainly does look good and very colorful. Due to this and due to having so many characters and plot lines, the story rarely has a dull moment. And let's not forget the concept of an artificial human finding a purpose with the help of different people. Although this is poorly executed, it has a lot of potential. But can you guess the greatest part about this series as a whole? Astolfo. I know, Astolfo is a meme at this point, but she, and yes, I'm calling her a she because she works very hard to look the way she does, and I feel like the adorable paladin will appreciate it. But seriously though, I really like the way she looks, her mannerisms and both the voice actors. She's the most lovable character because how unique and full of life she was. Among a cast of dull and exhausting characters, she was a wonderful ray of sunshine. Although she was the best character in my opinion, I must admit, characters like Mordred, Achilles and Shakespeare had their moments too. And I should definitely tip my hat to the amazing music composers for their impressive work. Their music is so good that they can make an awful speech appear mediocre.
Listen, maybe free will isn't something we actually need. I don't know if abandoning our duties is really the right decision or not, but even if we never manage to catch a break, even if only despair awaits us, I still want to walk that path of my own volition.
And not having Emiya, Rin and Saber was definitely a plus. Since we are on the subject of characters, let's take a look at what is wrong with most of them. So my first complaint is there are too many characters. As an example, the series tries to tell the story of around 18 characters through a 24 episode anime. But due to the show mainly revolving around 3 or 4 main characters, there's barely any time to focus on the rest of the characters. But that is only a small part of the overall problem because the writer doesn't do a very good job at writing complex characters. Here's the thing, all your characters don't have to be complex characters with a ton of nuance. Because let's face it, when you have around 18 storylines converging into one in only 24 episodes, there's going to be a lot of rushing. As an example, Fate Zero, which had less characters, had more time to flesh out its cast. Even though Fate Zero's writing was undoubtedly bad, it had a reasonable amount of things to praise. Meanwhile, this show doubles the cast of characters and tries to shove in subjects it is not capable of handling. But I'll get back to those subjects later. So the protagonist of this series is Sieg, a homunculus created for the purpose of producing magical power. The events of the story kicks off with him gaining sentience and breaking out of the pod he was trapped in. Now why did he gain sentience? Why now? We are not given a reason other than the Grail or God wants it to. Don't get me wrong, this alone has the potential to be a good story if handled well, but sadly the potential is wasted by this awful story. Sieg is supposed to be a blank slate, so he can be a stand-in for the viewer, but the problem is that he is lucky to an unrelatable degree, and well, he gets over a few existential crises remarkably fast. But I must say, he works well with Astolfo. That is because Astolfo is extremely expressive, meanwhile Sieg is passive and indifferent for most of the time. If the story focused on Sieg learning to be a hero inspired by Astolfo, it could have been a lot better. But no. Astolfo and Sieg spend barely any time together in the first 13 episodes, and then she is made into a joke and a plot device. This decision was truly disappointing. Then we have Joan d'Arc, whose personality rivals Sieg's in terms of blandness. She's a terribly written Mary Sue. She's overpowered,
Assassin of Red. Do not assume that you are capable of stopping me with something of that level.
She can literally command all the servants. Now Sieg and Astolfo have quite huge character flaws that make them relatable, at least to a degree. As an example, Sieg knows nothing of the magical world and Astolfo is clumsy and weak. But Joan, her flaw is that she is too kind and too loving. Oh yeah, did I mention that she can see the future? She gets a lot of screen time despite her character never being developed. Then we go to Shiro Kotomine, the villain. Oh boy. Now the story starts with him being a mysterious person who isn't affected by emotions, but as the series progresses, we get to find out what his goal is, and it's retarded. Shiro apparently wants to give souls a physical form. First off, I have no clue why he thought this will solve all the problems, because it will increase the population. And let's not forget, this physical manifestation of souls could end up being manifested as abominations that beg for a death they will never receive. Here's the thing, I don't know how this magic works, so let's just assume everything works out perfectly as Shiro envisioned it. Then what? No more death, no more pain, no more need for food, no more sadness, and basically nothing left for humanity to overcome. Despite how unsettling that sounds, why would God let such a wish be granted? Even if it were granted, wouldn't God just return the world to normal? And as someone who believes in God, why would Shiro aspire to change what God has created? God is all-knowing and all-powerful, so maybe there is a reason for suffering to exist. And as a priest, he should respect God's will. But no, just no. Let's move on and talk about Caster of Black, that guy who makes them rock monsters. So he hates humanity, and near the end of the series he decides to activate Keter Malkuth, a being that would return the world to its most primordial form, known as Eden. So I can't help but wonder why Caster didn't pull this off earlier. Let's ignore that for a moment. So this beast, known as Keter Malkuth, is able to absorb being's soul and become stronger, but only uses its power against random pawns. I mean, we can just assume everyone in this universe are pure idiots, but I was expecting a better reason than they forgot. And speaking of idiots, they shit all over Spartacus. Although the real story of Spartacus doesn't have a lot of evidence to back itself up, Spartacus symbolizes a slave revolt leader who had to fight against the tyrannical slavers. But here, he is a psycho who just attacks anyone, including his allies. Personally, I am not offended or anything, but making Spartacus an absolute moron was very disappointing. So, since we are on the topic of disappointment, let's talk about Achilles. Achilles' entire story is changed. He wasn't bathed in the river Styx, instead he was bathed in a sacred flame. Okay, that doesn't really change anything, but Achilles was extremely unfortunate because alongside him, Chiron, his own master, was summoned by the opposite faction. And that's not all. His powers are the only powers that can actually damage Achilles, which is incredibly convenient because if the opposite team summoned some other archer instead of Chiron, Achilles would have won almost every fight he got into because he is immortal. This would make Shiro the winner and the story would fall apart. Speaking of Greek heroes and stories, back in those days people went to plays for entertainment. Those days the gods were a huge part of their plays most of the time. So when they introduced a character as a god, they used a machine that would lower the actors down to the stage. They used to call this technique, which convey divine intervention, as the god from the machine, also known as Deus Ex Machina. So why am I talking about old plays, even though this term Deus Ex Machina was used to refer to a certain thing in the past. Now this term is used to describe an event where the all-powerful writer of the story intervenes and makes something extremely unlikely to take place. As an example, if Astolfo was a moment later and the homunculi discovered Sig, the story stops right then and right there. If the homunculi gave a shit and asked Astolfo more questions or looked at what she is carrying, the story ends then and there.
Lord Ryder, Lord Castor is in search of a homunculus that escaped. Do you happen to—
No clue.
Then if you will excuse us.
Keep up the good work, guys. Bye.
If any other hero or villain stumbled onto Sig, the story ends then and there. If the Yggdrasilania family kept guards near the homunculus room, the story ends then and there. Now I'm certain you might ask, why the hell wouldn't Yggdrasilania family place guards in the place that provides their entire army with magical power? Don't know. Sure, that is incredibly lucky, but it is within the realm of possibility, right? Except for not posting guards. What were they thinking? Sure, I will grant the show that, because sometimes people are just lucky, even in real life, am I right? But that is only the beginning of his incomprehensible luck. It is as if God himself intervenes to save this worthless creature. Don't believe me? Astolfo tries to run away with Sig, encounters Siegfried and Gord. Both Astolfo and Sig are pathetic in this situation, but Siegfried was in the middle of an existential crisis, so instead of taking the traitors with them, Siegfried just kills himself and gives his power and life to Sig. Okay, tell me how any of that made any sense. Siegfried's existential crisis was about not having a purpose and mindlessly helping others. So what does he do to break the cycle? He mindlessly sacrifices himself to save someone who is already dead. They sure were lucky. Because if Siegfried ignored Astolfo's naive ramblings and took her back to her master, the story ends right then and there. If Castor himself came to retrieve the homunculus, the story ends right then and there. If Astolfo's master used a command seal and asked her to bring Sig to Castor, the story ends then and there. But none of this happened, because how should I say this? The writer isn't clever enough to make any of this make sense. If it weren't for pure chance, Sig would have been dead and Shiro wins. The end. Okay, two instances of extreme contrived scenarios are pretty awful, but if that was it, it could have managed to not disappoint me completely. But that was asking too damn much of this stupid show, because the contrivances do not end here. Since Sig is an absolute moron, he decides to go back alone to the Yggdrasilania fortress and save the rest of the homunculi. And look at that, a war is going on right when he arrives. So he sneaks his way into— wait. Okay, since the armies are fighting, I can give Sig the benefit of the doubt. Maybe everyone was too damn distracted. But guess what? The fortress is surrounded by eye-birds. Castor is still inside, and so is the rest of the human mages. So as soon as Sig tries to enter the castle, they will find out and capture him or kill him. Thus concludes the entire story. Even if I give this one to Sig and was okay with him entering the castle, this stupid bitch helping him makes no sense, because he was created to protect the castle and to not be biased.
I know very little of the emotions that most humans feel, so those of a hero are far beyond my comprehension.
Okay, let's say that stupid bitch helped him in because he was nice. But the rest of the homunculi shouldn't care. And the homunculus room must be in an extremely hard to reach place, with so many people guarding it.
Drosse, Gayen. Hey, are you alright?
Okay. But if he starts to break homunculi out, an alarm will alert everyone and the mages will come running, right?
I'm aware of that, but even then... It's a lot better than being tools of war. Or would you rather be left to die?
Okay, wait. Weren't people notified when Sieg broke out of the tube? I guess not. Okay, I know what you are thinking. Everyone is busy, but an unknown person has infiltrated their base and is destroying their power grids. Now I'm sure the Millennia family was expecting infiltration and covert attacks, but no, they don't even notice it till Sieg has left the building. These are not nitpicks. For an example, here is a nitpick. Astolfo being startled when she almost slips and falls down from a roof.
Top of...
Ryder!
That was close, thank you.
When she effortlessly survived, getting blasted off the sky and falling from 2000 feet. Now don't get me wrong, Astolfo surviving a fall like that has its own fair share of problems. But it makes no sense for her to be startled when she was about to fall off a roof, because it wouldn't even leave a scratch on her. Now let's come back why Sieg's luck is not a nitpick. Amidst strange surveillances, vigilant mages who are expecting an attack, a normal frail homunculus walks into a fortress in the middle of a war zone. Does that sound reasonable? He would have been killed so damn fast by either the warriors or the people occupying the castle, because they know who he is, and they should be on edge because of how vulnerable they are during a massive war. This is beyond stupid and contrived. Even with all this stupid shit, I'll still let the show go, because I was praying for things to make sense from now on. But nope. Things just keep getting stupider and stupider. I spent so much time on this one subject, on this one kind of error. I would like to ask you, why did I do that? The answer is simple actually. The entire series revolves around Astolfo and Sieg getting the Holy Grail. And they shouldn't be able to get it, because there are so many. And when I say so many, I don't mean a small number. A massive number of instances where the story should have just ended and stopped in its tracks. But since the writer wants to give the grail to Sieg and Astolfo, he goes out of his way to make them overcome obstacles that are impossible to overcome in the most stupid and contrived ways. These constant interventions of the writer are a great example for trying to subvert expectations and trying to force an outcome that simply doesn't make any sense. Awful writing like this is what has created an overwhelming negative stigma around the phrase Deus Ex Machina, because anyone who ignores consistency and rationality is a bad writer. Now you might say, well, this is a show with magic and heroes, it is inherently irrational. To that I respond with, logic in a fictional story doesn't have to follow the exact rules of logic in the real world, as long as it is established and consistent. A great example of this is the command seals. They are established as a mechanic that gives you complete control over a servant in the beginning. So that means when someone uses a command seal, the viewer expects it to work the same way. But in this very story, this mechanic we just went over is inconsistent. So the command seals are a type of magic that allows you to control your servants regardless of how they feel and regardless of the circumstance. As an example, in Fate Zero, Archibald uses a command seal to make a prideful servant commit suicide. Kiritsugu used a command seal to make Saber destroy the very thing she lived for. And well, that was only in Fate Zero, but this is Fate Apocrypha. Okay, fine. Then let's take a gander at Vlad the Third. Vlad fights for the Grail so he can erase his legacy as a vampire because of how much he despises his reputation as a vampire. But Darnek uses a single command seal to make Vlad become the very thing he absolutely despises. So yeah, the command seals should work almost instantly and continue even after all the seals are used up. Because Vlad didn't turn human after Danek was murdered, and he imprinted his mind or something into himself using a command seal. Thus, I feel like this conclusion I arrived at was quite fair. So let's look at times where the command seals were inconsistent. The first is against Achilles. Now you might argue it doesn't change anything because Achilles is immortal, but the rest around there are not. Let's not forget, Siegfried's phantasm is a power that wipes out an entire area. But Gord, who uses one of his commandments, is distracted by Danek. So Siegfried stops the direct order that was done using a command seal. Now I don't know about you, but that makes no sense. Siegfried should be nuking the entire place with his power, because let's not forget, he has nearly infinite power at this point. Now you might just see this as a mere inconsistency that doesn't change much, but it most certainly does. It would at least distract Achilles enough so Charon can snipe him. Or if this reckless act destroyed Frankenstein, Astolfo and Sieg would be dead soonly after, because she saves their lives and Shiro wins. And let's just assume that Siegfried is good enough to only hit his enemies. If that's the case, then Atlanta would be dead. That means she wouldn't bring Spartacus to John, and Spartacus wouldn't lead John to Astolfo and Sieg, so they would be dead. And Astolfo and Sieg would be dead too. That means Shiro wins. So now with that established, let's go to the part that really bugged me. Dominatrix lady comes to exact revenge on Astolfo and orders her to kill Sieg using a command seal, and she almost does it. But since she resists so much, the dominatrix lady uses the second commandment seal and orders Astolfo to kill Sieg once more. Astolfo somehow resists, which makes no sense whatsoever, because it only took one seal for others to completely go against their ideals. But this time, it just ain't so. Because if Astolfo killed Sieg, Shiro wins and the story ends right then and there. Because let's face it, Astolfo just doesn't follow the orders, because if she did, the story ends right then and there. And I'm not sure why Mordred helped out her enemies, but well, she did. If she didn't, or if Mordred wasn't just watching everything happening, the story ends right then and there, and I will be very happy. And let's not forget, Mordred killed the dominatrix lady because she was part of the faction of Black. Then why did she leave those two alive? That feels illogical and stupid, to be honest. But I can give this moment the benefit of the doubt and say, well, maybe she felt sorry for the two pathetic losers. So afterwards, Astolfo starts to disappear because her master, the dominatrix lady, is dead. But for some inexplicable reason, Sieg has command spells now, and he saves Astolfo. If he didn't have command seals, that very moment Astolfo would be dead and the story will fall apart later. And by the way, they joke about the command seals still being active, and it's so stupid, because she should be doing everything in her power to kill Sieg, not just stupid random charges. Thus the character assassination of the lovely Astolfo begins. And oh yeah, does Sieg even got enough mana to restore Astolfo to her full strength? I thought he was at death's door. Guess we got to ignore common sense just to keep up. This was one of the most frustrating shows I have ever watched, and I watched a lot of garbage. If you still aren't convinced that this isn't one of the worst written stories ever, please continue watching, because there is a lot more problems I have to highlight. The show tries very hard to convey the complex nature of free will, but there's a huge problem. The show itself doesn't understand what free will is. I'm not saying free will is a simple subject. It is still in the process of being understood. But the writer pretends to provide free will to his characters in an extremely flawed way. This is exceedingly made obvious by the masturbatory dialogue between characters. One of the best examples is when Sieg attempts to explain why he should be free.
Listen, Maybe free will isn't something we actually need. And to be honest, I don't know if abandoning our duties is really the right decision or not. But even if we never manage to catch a break, even if only despair awaits us, I still want to walk that path of my own volition. We don't need salvation. We want to be given the freedom to choose.
Maybe free will isn't something we actually need? This is without a doubt one of the most embarrassing speeches I have ever heard. And the show acts like it's the greatest thing ever. So let's go through it and figure out why. Let's go through the best possible interpretation of this speech. So according to the best faith interpretation, Sieg isn't certain whether or not he needs free will or guidance. Thus he isn't certain about leaving the duties him and his fellow homunculus were given. But regardless of what happens to him, he wants to choose his own path. Okay, that's the most vanilla speech ever. And I thought the Yigad Millennia created them without emotions, nor the capability of higher thought because of this scene.
Lord Ryder, Lord Castor is in search of a homunculus that escaped. Do you happen to—
No clue.
Then if you will excuse us.
Keep up the good work, guys!
Because why would they create artificial humans that can potentially revolt against them? But the Yigad Millennia, much like everyone else, are complete morons. So I guess that's consistent. Let's look at the last lines of this page. According to the best faith interpretation, this means they don't want the kind of salvation Jesus provides humans because they ain't got no souls. They just want to choose how they live. Aren't we forgetting something important? I feel like we are. Let's look at the facts just to make sure. First, homunculi live only 3 years. Okay, they are born with the ability to understand and speak English, Japanese, German. This is proven by the fact that Sieg asks help from Astolfo the moment he gets out of the tube. Number 3, there is diversity among the appearances of the homunculi. Just look at them. They even have 2 genders. Sieg is extremely fragile compared to the rest of the homunculi. Now this is a bit tricky because after Siegfried gives him his heart, Sieg appears to have grown faster and become stronger. Unless it is the rate at which homunculi age. So do we have any solid proof to whether which it is? Kinda. Here is the problem with the fast aging thing. If Sieg continues to mature at the age he was maturing, he would be an old man within a few weeks. Not only that, after receiving Siegfried's heart, he starts to feel hunger.
Here, for you.
I see. This must be the cause of the strange discomfort I've been feeling for a while.
Take it.
For the first time. Considering how unfamiliar it is for him, I would assume homunculi don't eat. So Sieg's heart changed his biology, thus it is safe to say that he and the others who live in tubes are relatively frail. So the theory I had about Sieg and the others being created physically frail to be mana batteries is correct. So why were they given the knowledge of everything including languages, how to use magic and so on and so on. Now someone can argue that the battery homunculi are the failed mage homunculi. So they have the knowledge of spells and so on. That is possible. But I must question, why would they use failed ones to provide power to the mages, their armies and their servants? But they have been consistently stupid. So I won't be surprised if they actually use faulty homunculi who cannot fight to be power sources. But let's get back to the theme of free will. So Sieg wants to choose what he does with the 3 years he has left. Okay, so how does he even know what he is doing is done because he wants to? He is following his instincts which were given to him by his creators. Even ignoring that, considering how many contrivances there are and the visions John and Shiro receives, God is literally controlling them and nothing matters. Because everything that happens in Fate Apocrypha is God playing with his action figures. So no one Not even the human characters who pretend to have free will don't have free will. They are just puppets in the story of a weird god who sucks at creating a compelling story, despite being omniscient and all-powerful. So either they literally threw free will and choice out the window, or the writer is such a moron. He didn't understand how he was contradicting himself on so many levels. Now before I conclude my scattered mess of an opinion, let's play the devil's advocate for the argument I just made. Now despite me saying free will was thrown out the window, every piece of fiction is dictated by an all-powerful, all-knowing being named the author. So what is wrong with seeing him pull the strings? Okay, that's a fair question to ask. What makes this awful but some other stories are good even though they all were created by an author who had complete control over their creations? Having Deus Ex Machina after Deus Ex Machina and having a predetermined future and hinting at the existence of a being that literally controls everything can damage the stakes in a massive way. Because if there is a god who rescues our protagonists time and time again, ignoring the odds, we start to realize that the protagonists aren't in any danger ever. This realization annihilates the stakes and thus breaks the immersion of the consumers. That right there is an awful thing, because if a piece of fiction fails to immerse its consumers, it fails at being a piece of fiction. Now I'm sure some of you didn't even notice some of the things I said, but that doesn't mean they don't exist, and we shouldn't let storytellers get away with bad writing, because it undermines the value of fiction created by people with actual talent and passion. So I hope you will like, subscribe and join me on my journey to glorify the great and expose the overrated, because I'm just getting started.